All right. Jeopardy music.
One. Here we go. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The June 2024 meeting of the Alamance County Planning Board will come to order. You got the role I have.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Present, so more than form to conduct business.
Correct. Has everybody had a chance to read the minutes from last meeting?
Go for it. Second.
Got a motion and a second on the minutes. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. So we've got some public comments for our meeting tonight at land spacing. So we're looking at 3 minutes. We want to hear what everybody's got to say. We'd like to hear it one time. So I'm gonna relax that 3-minute rule. If you got some words you want us to hear, we want to hear them, but we'd like to hear them once. So, Mr. Jeff Thronberg, number one.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Thronberg, general contractor, and also the president of the Alamance Castle Home Builders Association. It was just my understanding, you've heard me speak the past 2 months, but there was possibly a vote tonight, so I just wanted to sort of recap what we see and sort of the stance for as general contractor and home builders. I think it was in the March meeting. I think Wilson Mize from the Department of Health and Human Services was here, addressing a lot of valid concerns and questions from the board. Two of the most valid, in my opinion, was, the septics and well contamination. But you can go back and see his stance on that was that he wasn't seeing any kind of cross contamination. Even in wells and septics, there were minimum 50 feet apart. Then there was some talk about the wells, I think the community wells, and there was some questions about that as far as depleting the water table. He said he'd seen a couple, and I'm just recapping, but he'd seen a couple instances where that happened, but it was less likely to happen with individual wells because of the pressure. So some of the concerns, I was really comfortable with what he was saying, and I thought the board was as well. There was a lot in those 2 meetings. There was a lot of inaccurate numbers that were being said back and forth to board members. So last month, if you remember, I provided median prices for 1 acre, 2 acre lots, what the actual median price for a 1,600 square foot house was, what the effect was. But I just want to recap on that a little bit. That if you remember, the 1 acre lot average median price is 38 to 39,000. The 2 acre was 72,000. So that's a $33,000 difference. The median price for a house 1516 was 365. So after that, one of the board members made a comment that $365,000 house wasn't affordable housing. Well, the numbers don't lie. That is the median price in Alamance County for a 1,600 square foot house, with the lots at prices where they are now. So that is the new norm, right? We're not, I can tell you when 1989, when I bought that same square foot house, I had to get in the military, it was 70,000, right? And then it continually went up, and now it's 365. So that is that. The other thing is I've heard a lot of comments from board members talking about protecting the integrity of Alamance County, increasing the lot size and increasing the house. If we just take that $32,000 or $33,000 difference, and we take the median price of a house, which is $365. Just the difference in the lot from what it is now to 2 acres takes that house to $398,000. Now, if you remember last month when I told you what it was going to affect the house payment from your average person, over $400 a month before taxes, PMI insurance, that kind of stuff. So to protect the integrity of Alamance County, you have to protect the integrity of its citizens. And basically, if you enforce it or you implement this, you're not protecting the Alamance County citizens. Basically, you're handcuffing them. And then what happens to them? Do they go elsewhere? Right? Do they go to other counties? Can they not afford that $400 or $500 a month? So the numbers and the economic impact on the citizens is tremendous just by doing this. And I can understand that some people and what their reasons are and why they're backing this. However, we got to do what's right for the greater good. And I ask you guys and ladies, as you make your vote, keep what's greater good for Alamance County, because you don't want to lose your tax base. You don't want to lose your citizens. You've never once heard me say anything about how it affects us as builders. Not once, right? Because we know the most important asset in Alamance County is the citizens and how that affects them. All right, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Rick Murray.
Rick Murray, reside at 3035 Lynch Store Road in Mebane, Alamance County. I am a custom home builder developer and the secretary of the Home Builder Association. I've ran all those same numbers that Jeff has. I'm not going to go through all those again. He's right on with his numbers and the meaning of them. I moved up here from Chatham County, and I moved up here because it's comfortable here. And I don't want to see that comfort level taken away by forcing lifelong residents, children, to have to move somewhere else where they can afford a home. I don't want to see folks that have had properties in their family history forever that now all of a sudden becomes unusable. I think, as Jeff said, that I just think that's a very big disservice towards the citizens of Alamance County. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Rodney Garrison.
Thank you for the board for all your time and input in this. And I'm a little bit new onto the scene, but I'm a lifelong Alamance County resident. My family was here in 1865, so I've been here for the whole duration of it. And I've seen the growth. I'm a contractor too. I'm a well contractor. Okay, and I see, as I drive around, I see the impact of what it's having on our county. And I understand we're in this to make a living. I'm not trying to step on any toes, but the fact is, I know Mr. Wilson knows what you're talking about there, but I personally have experienced some of this impact that it's having environmentally on our wells. That's my thing. I'm a level C contractor, and I deal with water problems and water quality issues. So I see it happening. I see the potential. I know a 1,500 foot well with a half a gallon a minute or less, and 1,000 foot in 2 different developments. And I've got friends on the board on the Alamance County. I've worked with everybody in the industry. I've real estate on down. I've worked with everybody, but it just concerns me to see that the impact that it's having. Like I said, we've got family land too, but these houses prices have gone up. That's affected us in the way of property taxes. I mean, I could not afford to build my house over again right now, to be honest with you, based on the current valuation of it. So as a lifelong resident, what I looked up as median household income of $72,000, it's still not affordable. It's not affordable. We don't have our residents. No, they're not staying here. There's people coming from other places that can afford that kind of thing. And they're the ones that are in Alamance County now. I just see it happening all around us. And I urge the board, you know, as I think it says in your mission statement, that, the thoughtful and, orderly growth and development of our land base upon respect for our rich history, culture, and fairness to our citizens. I know 2 acres is not gonna solve everybody's issues, but I think it's a compromise. I don't want to compromise. That means more dollars in my pocket if I've got an opportunity to work at another house. But I don't want to see that sacrifice at the integrity of Alamance County and its citizens and the environmental impact it has when you take away the trees off the land and it's gone. They're not coming back. Those hardwoods are not coming back. The environmental impact is there. And also I see it on the wells, and the growth is going to go further and further out into the rural communities. The next thing I know, we're gonna have a landfill sitting out there because we're overpopulated. And the plight of everybody, I think we could work together on this thing and compromise. I think the 2 acre, I would go more if it was me, but 2 acres, we got to deter. I'm not trying to deter I'm not trying to deter the Alamance County and our custom builders. I don't like to see these tract homes where we got a house every 50 feet and we got a well every 50 feet and 100 feet. It's going to come back to bite us in the end. We need to learn from what's happening around us in the state and not let Alamance County go in that direction. So I urge the board to vote in that direction. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Marlowe Countess.
Members of the planning board, Rodney, I love you, but I'm gonna beg to differ with you.
No, y'all, I'm a minority in this group. I'm sorry.
I would like to request that no changes be made to the current UDA concerning lot sizes. The current minimums of 30,000 is that it's a minimum. It's not the average, it's extremely rare. I've sat through several of these meetings and have yet to hear a valid reason why this recommendation is even being made. One board member stated the water table was at risk, but representatives from environmental health have said there's no proof of that. Another board member was concerned about septic failures. Every lot approved in Alamance County has a primary septic field and a secondary septic field, a backup field. So, and there's advances being made in septics all the time. Increased lot sizes will negatively affect property owners in Alamance County. Developers will not pay the same price per acre with a smaller lot deal. A farmer who wants to sell a portion of his family farm to a developer so he can retire comfortably can see his property value cut 50% if this proposed minimum lot size is approved. My biggest objection to seeing lot sizes increase is affordability. At 365,000, it's like you said, you're not going to be able to build a house in Alamance County for probably under 450,000 if this passes. On a personal level, my father owned a 131 acre farm in southwestern Virginia. He died in 1985 at the age of 49. The county we lived in would not allow us to subdivide the land in tracts smaller than 10 acres. So instead of 131 lots would have provided a nice nest egg for my mom to live comfortably on. She had to sell 12 lots at a fraction of their true value and had to continue working well up into her 70s. From what I perceive out of these meetings, the only reason you're proposing this is because you don't like the looks of it. There's no other reason. And the irony of that we're talking about these lot sizes out in the county, the people that have purchased these are purchasing them because they're larger lots. And they'll get to see their kids play in their yards and they'll get to plant a garden. So for what you don't like and don't want to see is somebody else's dream home. So please don't take somebody else's dream away from you.
Kristen.
Good evening, board. Good to see you guys. I've been here before speaking, and obviously the majority of us are here for the same reasons. And this gentleman, I've only heard one person speak out against this the times I've been here listening. I've listened to the meetings online when I couldn't attend. But as a developer, contractor here, we live here, my husband and I, and work in this industry. We live here and we work here. So we understand that growth is coming. I don't think you can stop it. These realtors and builders, they see it, they run the numbers, they know all the details, but I think we've got to work with the growth. It's coming, it's inevitable. The increase from what it is now, 30,000 to 2 acres to us is very excessive. I think if we could come to a medium, maybe 1 acre, and I told you guys before, that's on average what we develop. Like an acre is a minimum. A lot of times they're more than an acre. I just think if we could come together, maybe have another, or not another, I don't think we've had one yet, but a roundtable discussion with more members of the community that work in here and not just the subcommittee that's consisting of you guys, where we can open up and have discussion and maybe we can work together and come to a good conclusion for everybody. Because we've all got to live here. We've all got to work together to make Alamance County great. And there's a lot of stuff going on in this county right now that's in the news. I think we need to do something good and not something that's going to hurt the county. So that's mine. We just ask that you carefully consider this if you vote tonight, going forward for the future of Alamance County. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris.
Chris Faust, 4990 62 South. Just wanted to reiterate what they said. And also, I see this every day. I don't know this gentleman here. I thought I knew every well contractor in the state, but I guess I don't. But I see this every day also. We do hundreds of jobs every year, separate jobs. And I see the 1 acre lot, the 2 acre lot is, to me, one of the worst. If you want to preserve farmland, I come from the biggest, and there might be a bigger farmer out here than we were, but I doubt it. I know what it's like to be on the farm. But you go to 2 acres, that's just eventually 10 years from now, you got that much more land you're pushing out there that you're taking from the farm. If you got a 70, I know we've got the PUD community or whatever it is where you can put less houses, but I doubt this board will pass that. If I got 40 lots on 100 acres that would perk, and you gotta have 2 acre lots, it could be impossible because the good soil may be on the other end of the place. We pump stuff off site all the time. We got areas just for where the good soil is. And you're still not using up the whole farm. If you got a 100 acre farm, you got 20 acres of good land, you pump it up there. But if you hold that 2 acre, hold our feet to the fire with that 2 acres, y'all gonna eat up way more land eventually than y'all will just keeping it the way it is. And I don't believe in the 30,000 is small. We don't do that much, but there's gonna be some times where you could do like and I said this last time, you could do a small community, have all the houses clustered up on small lots and still pump the septic offsite. I think if y'all pass this and hold everybody's feet to the fire, it's gonna be a rule across the board and it's just gonna be no, we can't do it. It's gotta be 2 acres per lot. So I think that's the worst thing you could do for farmland in my mind, because the development's coming. So you're gonna have 2 acre lots everywhere. If you do this, you're gonna eat up way more land in a few years. I know y'all don't want it, but who's to say if you look at the houses on these 1 acre lots, they're nice houses. Who's to say, like Marlo said, that's your dream. But some of these farms are laid around with junk. I mean, it's just, it's to each his own, but you're kind of crippling the citizens of this county by doing this 2 acre minimum. Because I'm sure it's just like anything else in government. Y'all know how it is. Income tax was passed in the early 1900s, was going to be a few months. Look at it. So, I mean, it's just, when y'all do this, it's going to be forever. So I just want y'all to consider our side. Thank you.
Rob.
Well, good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to come before y'all. My perspective on this, and again, Rob Countess, I'm a Mebane resident, been in North Carolina for 24 years. Also had the privilege of serving with Mr. Cheek, as a member of the planning board for an unfilled term and then a full time myself. So I appreciate the role that you all play and the deliberations that have to occur, in instances such as this. I'm not going to repeat any of the things that my previous speakers have brought to the table. I want to offer just a couple perspectives. I'm a director with AKG of America. We're an employer in Alamance County. And Alamance County is a beneficiary of a very healthy economy. And we are seeking qualified employees for roles as business grows in this area. We want to have good jobs in Alamance County. To recruit and retain good employees, we have to have good housing options for them. And Marlo talked to the challenges that come with affordability. Several others, mentioned that. So that's a challenge that we'll have. And the fact of the matter is North Carolina is a very attractive destination for new businesses. CNBC ranked North Carolina as the #1 state for business last year. So we are seeing companies and people come to this area left, right, and center. And we have to accommodate that. It's our reality. The second thing that comes from another role that I have, I'm a licensed broker by the North Carolina State Real Estate Commission and a member of the National Association of Realtors. And one of the things that is incumbent on a realtor, the code of ethics, is to work to provide or preserve property rights for owners of real property. And Marlo spoke to this from a personal experience, but the fact of the matter is there are generationally owned farms that the descendants are not choosing to follow in the chose. And if we pass this, the value of the land that a family would have to pass wealth to either themselves or their descendants is going to be greatly diminished because the fair market value of that land will go down with a 2-acre minimum lot size. There's no denying that. So my personal politics are I don't share those, but I'm informed by one quote, and I'll share this with you. He who governs least governs best. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Jerry Cook.
Hello, I'm not drunk. It's neuropathy in my feet from Agent Orange. Of course, when these folks start frowning at me, I'm like, don't get drunk. Can't never say it. From the planning department's mission statement, quote, "We pledge to provide professional advice and technical expertise to elected officials, appointed boards and commissions, city departments, and citizens in order to assist in understanding and addressing key community issues and priorities." We can tell tonight we don't all understand the same thing. That has not been done. In fact, it has been totally ignored. You've had realtors, lawyers, builders, developers, farmers, and others address this board. Those whose professional advice and technical expertise your department's mission statement pledges to provide. They have been ignored in your quest to create, at others' expense, your version of Camelot here in Alamance County. So I propose changing the mission pledge to, we pledge to follow around like an old bull with a ring in his nose, whoever comes up with the goofiest plan to change what's been working for years. Read the minutes of your meeting. You have been advised that your plan will decrease property values, increase housing costs, decrease the availability of affordable housing, make it harder for low-income residents to find housing, decrease economic potential for aging landowners, and so forth. All of these examples are examples of socio-economic discrimination. Specifically mentioned are enacting rules to exclude low-income residents. Once approved, your plan and its impact can be explained to the ACLU, National Urban League, and others. Then perhaps we will have a test case in Alamance County with national implications. You could all become famous.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that wants to speak to this board? In that case, our public input session is closed. Does anybody on this board got anything they want to say? All right, in that case, we'll go on to the old business. Mr. Director.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Board members, the following changes to the subdivision ordinance proposal are mostly minor typographical errors or modifications to the ordinance at the request of the planning board from your last meeting. Obviously, if you have any questions, as I'm going through this, through each section, please feel free to ask. And of course, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have at the end. So I'll just go through these section by section. Largely, this is the same document that you looked at last time. But as I mentioned, I'll detail the changes that you have before you. Happy to answer any questions. So starting with the beginning, section 6.9.1, the purpose and goals, simply a corrected typo here in the second sentence. Change the word or to of. Section 6.9.2 through all the way through 6.9.8, no change at all. Section 6.9.9, change the typo permanently preserves to permanently preserved. That's on page 8. Section 6.9.10, we clarified the definition of marginal land, and we added requirements that notes be added to the face of plats if properties are within a flood hazard area or a watershed area. We also clarified that the vegetative buffer areas cannot intersect with streets or rights of way. In section 10.9.10.4, we also included a provision that stormwater not create erosion and that it keeps flows below erosive velocities. Section 6.9.10.5 will now require that stream buffers be measured from the top of the bank of a stream. Section 6.9.11. For public roads, we included language requiring use of U.S. Postal Service cluster box units for applicable subdivisions on public roads. This is already a rule. It's just not featured in the subdivision ordinance. So this is just simply clarifying an existing rule. We also simplified the reference for the fire code's road standards, clarified some measurements on the turnaround feature image table on page 13. At the request of the board. Under private roads, we simplified the reference to the NCDOT's road manual and substituted in the Burlington Graham Metropolitan Planning Organization's Comprehensive Transportation Plan for the old term Alamance County Thoroughfare Plan. Finally, under the miscellaneous road provisions, we clarify the NCDOT will sign a certificate of approval for certain final subdivision plans. Give me a moment, make sure I'm on the right section here. 6.9.12. This section now outlines the design standards for lots. We swapped this with subsection 13. We thought it was important to reorganize this ordinance, this section of the ordinance, so that information about lots precedes information about subdivision types. In this section on page 21, we reduced the sewage easement width from 15 feet, or I'm sorry, to 15 feet, and adding maintenance access provision per environmental health recommendations. We also corrected a typo for the word accessory under the one dwelling per lot section. Important to note here, and I think this is worthy of your discussion, the lot width and street frontage have been increased to 175 feet. And the width along the cul-de-sac has been increased to 26 feet. Also, the guidance on corner lots has been simplified to simply ensure that they allot space for side setback requirements. And finally, under buffer strips, the sentence was added to ensure that this section does not conflict with the new vegetative buffer requirements. Any questions so far? All right. Section 6.9.13, and I think this is also worthy of quite a bit of additional debate. For types of subdivisions. This section has now been revised to break subdivisions into two primary categories: major subdivisions and minor subdivisions. Major subdivisions would be those of 15 or more lots, while minor subdivisions would contain 14 or fewer lots. Major subdivisions would typically require public road access, and they are divided into three subcategories. Conventional subdivisions would require a new minimum lot size of 2 acres. Cluster subdivisions could feature lots as small as 8,000 square feet with a 35% open space requirement. And hybrid subdivisions would be neither conventional or cluster subdivisions, and they would ultimately need planning board approval. Now down to minor subdivisions. Those would be accessed most likely by a private road or an existing road, and they are divided into two subcategories. Class 1 family subdivisions, which would be no more than 4 lots, would be intended for direct family members, and they would not be subject to the 2-acre minimum. And Class 2 subdivisions would feature 2-acre lots, and they could still be accessed by a private road. Section 6.9.14, cluster subdivisions. Just a minor modification here, and then I've got a request on this at the end I'll get to. The side setback distance has been increased from 5 feet to 10 feet after speaking with the fire marshal's office. And we added specifications for cluster subdivision lot width and street right of way. Getting down to the last section, 6.9.15, we corrected the numbering for submittal procedures and planning board review and approval sections. And also under planning board review and approval, where's my spot here? Planning board review and approval, this has been amended to require a special use permit procedure. The need for this procedural change is made apparent after the consulting with the UNC School of Government. So we had talked about the hybrid subdivision option being the situation where if it's not a conventional subdivision or a cluster, it would ultimately have to come before the planning board for review and approval. That would have to come in the form of a special use permit after talking with the UNC School of Government. And it couldn't be as simple as a review and then impose conditions. If you're going to impose conditions based on state legal procedures, that would have to come to the special use permit. So there would be an additional step for the developer in that process. The review process would be similar, and you'd have initial staff review, TRC review, acquire the special use permit and then bring that before the planning board for final review and approval with conditions. One final note here that I want to make, and I have a request if you are inclined to approve this tonight. 3 requests. Number 1, under the cluster subdivision, section 6.9.14, I would like to request that, under the minimum lot size section, that it would read, quote, setback and configuration requirements. It would read, quote, cluster subdivision lots are not subject to the street frontage or width and depth provisions of section 6.9.12.3. In other words, the general requirements of the ordinance dictate certain configuration of lots, but obviously clustered lots would be unique. They would be subject to their own special rules. So this just clarifies that they wouldn't have to meet those general requirements.
Say that again, please.
Yeah, so, cluster subdivision lots are not subject to the street frontage or width and depth provisions of section 6.9.12.3.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Under 6.9.15, item B there, that's broken into 3 sections, and item B specifies environmental health approval. That is really duplicative of something that's already in item A, where it requires that all certificates required on final plats by this section have been properly completed and signed. The certificates in section 8 and the appendices of the ordinance already require environmental health approval. So that's just duplicative. And then with that entire section in general. So if you look at, I want you to just take a look at the index page on this. If you go through here and look at each of these section by section, 1 through 11 and 15 are much more in line with a lot of the technical and regulatory cleanup and tightening that we've done in prior sections of the subdivision of the ordinance. The 12, 13, and 14 specifically design standards for lots, types of subdivisions, and cluster subdivisions are more under the umbrella of new policy. So if you are so inclined, I would recommend to move subsection 15 there, approval procedures, up to be the new 12. And then 12, 13, and 14 all bump down by 1. So that all the kind of technical, administrative type stuff is together, and then the policy stuff is together there at the end, if that makes sense. So that's all that I've got in terms of changes made and changes requested. And as I said, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Page 26, the family subdivision. If I read this correctly, it says a family subdivision proposals may not be approved if they originate from the same parent parcel within 1 year, the calendar year, the date of the first family subdivision approval.
Yeah.
Explain that to me.
Yeah, so we had talked, if I remember correctly, in our last meeting, we had talked about some sort of an allowance for what is common and what a lot of our commenters tonight had spoke about with family farms being divided up for family members. But potentially there could be a workaround where you do 4 or 5 lots now and you wait a little bit longer and you do a few lots again and you wait a little bit longer and you kind of take small bites. You eat the elephant 1 bite at a time. So this is simply in there to attempt to not allow folks to work around the rules where they're not doing a conventional subdivision little by little. There's a rule that kind of fences them into only doing 4 lots at a time, 4 or 5 lots at a time under that family umbrella. Does that make sense?
So is this section saying that in the calendar year, only 4 lots could be determined,
That's
or is
correct.
that 1 lot? It's
4
4
lots. Yeah, so if this rule were in effect and they presented a 4-lot subdivision today, then they would be eligible for a new set of up to 4 lots from the parent tract on June 13th, 2025, but not before that.
Okay.
So how would that work in the case of large families?
That's a good question.
What was your question now? How would that work in the case of large families? We had more than 4 kids.
That's a really good question. The reason that the number is 4 is because the existing regulations, the difference between class 1 and class 2 private roads kick in at the 5th lot. So that number 4 is really just in harmony with the existing road regulations. If you guys wanted to make a different recommendation on the number of lots or say that, for example, minor subdivisions don't have to comply with the 2 acres at all, or make any other kind of adjustment, then you certainly could. This is just these are the mechanisms that I put in
Sure.
after,
And that trigger was based on the road standard.
yeah, it's just
That
right in
number.
harmony with the road standards.
So could you make a provision where you take the 4 out? And they could just divide as many lots as they wanted to?
Divide indefinitely for the purpose of family.
And then if it triggers, a higher grade or wider road or whatever, then that would just be the case.
I would be more in favor of that suggestion myself.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, it would really go from 4 to 14, because as soon as they did the 15th, it would be a major subdivision.
I got you. Well, yes, and now all of that chunk in context with the other criteria of the 2 acre threshold. But that's a subset of concerns of mine in regards to the larger concern of mine. That doesn't really get to the root of the matter.
But that will be specific just to family. Subdivision, family land being divided by heirs or given to heirs.
There would have to be proof of family tie.
Right, so the second sentence there specifies who is a direct family member, any person related in direct lineage by blood, marriage, or adoption, and shall include grandparents, parents, grandchildren, children, brothers, sisters, and their in-law counterparts and their adopted counterparts.
Okay, now, if you had to stay with the 4 at a time. And you do 4 this year, you do 4 next year, you do the 4 next 3 years. That's the way. You come to the 4th year and you do 4 more. Does it drop, does that fall into the over 15 since you're doing this at 4 in different years?
If it's all along the same new road, once you get to the 15th lot, it would have to be paved to provide access to that 15th.
So it really makes no difference, when it reaches to the 14 threshold, that's the end of it right there. So if you want to allow more than 4 at a time, it really wouldn't be an issue other than the time variances. You would have to wait over 4 years in order to put the maximum amount in, or you're saying just do away with the 4 and you could put up to 14, and that's only family.
Based on this, yeah, that would be specifically.
I don't see a problem if that's what we want to do, but I don't see a family putting in 14 new houses, families. I don't know too many people got 14 kids.
This includes more than just kids.
You know,
Yeah.
if that's what the board feels like, we don't want to limit it to that more. I wouldn't have a problem with it, because if you're gonna fall into the major development after 14 anyway.
I think that the issue is not necessarily they're gonna build on those, it's just being able to divide it up. So like, I can use a scenario, you got the mother, the matriarch, and dad. If they have a big tract of land, hadn't considered giving it to the kids, or they had it in their mind, but then they become elderly and sick, and they wanna do it all paperwork wise in 1 year. In theory, if we limited to 4, they wouldn't be able to do that. They had more than 4 people they wanted to leave that family land to. So I'm thinking that would hinder that family member to have that scenario. It would almost force them to think ahead, like in my wife's family, there's 9. And they all have a chunk of land in that big parcel, and it took a little while, but they didn't do it 1 year at a time. It was done at one time, you know. Say, all right, here's all 9 pieces. Y'all do what you want to with it. Build a house, leave it there, whatever. So I think my thoughts is I wouldn't want to hinder. I don't think our goal is to hinder any family member from being able to do that, because that was the only reason why I brought up that family consideration. Because if you want to leave something to your heirs, I don't think we should create anything that would hinder you from doing that. Regardless how many kids they have, but they still have to follow, you know, the setbacks, the road, ease access if you have more than such and such houses or whatever. I think that's just part of this building period, not necessarily restricting you from cutting it up.
But, and what happens, you cut these 14 lots off, you know, to give to your heirs. You got lots. Where do you go to when they receive that as a blood relative and they say, okay, they got it, then they want to sell it?
Yes, that happens a lot.
You know, so there you go, you start selling lots to individuals outside the family.
But that discontinues that ability to expand.
Yeah, I was just saying, if you allow that to happen, you allow 14 lots to be developed, and then potentially can be sold it out individually. So
How big were your lots that your wife's family got divided up?
3+ acres each.
Then that would fall into a major subdivision anyhow, so it wouldn't even qualify for this family plan.
Right.
Okay.
But some of them, it just depends on what person what did, but yeah.
I think closing the state out.
Yeah.
That's a year.
I think part of the concern with this is that there's not strictly a legal authority in chapter 160D to allow for family subdivision not to comport with subdivision requirements. There is an express basis to say that probated estates and wills and intestate succession can divide a parcel of land. I think the idea is, if these kids are going to get it at some point anyway, can we allow it before the person dies and that be permissible? I think the idea is that's probably okay. But when we start talking about 14 lots, we have to remember that part of the reason we have the subdivision ordinance is to make sure we don't end up with lots that don't have adequate road frontage and don't otherwise comport with the requirements for a subdivision that we end up having to serve at some point and come back and fix because we allowed this land to be subdivided in this way. It was later sold to people who don't have the same type of interests. They're not as willing to let somebody drive in front of their house for all purposes, and we end up with problems later on. So when you got a family that all agrees to allow for access via the same road, we don't get a lot of complaints on that. But we do get complaints in situations where that land gets sold and there's a right of way that's been added, and there's an easement that allows for access, but then in the future, one person says, well, I don't want that person to have access in this way. I'm going to develop something here, or build something there. I'm going to cut off their access to the road, and we end up having problems. So just something to think about. I mean, there is the future to plan for development purposes and not just for the family and their interests.
Right. The land needs to be able to be transferred with appropriate use.
Right.
And not limit somebody else's ability to make use of that property.
Right.
Whether it be to develop it or access it or do whatever they can with it.
Right. The subdivision ordinance is designed to allow for access for folks that's not going to be infringible by somebody else. And when we allow for family subdivisions to be divided into 14 parcels, I can see that being a problem in the future. So just think about that.
And currently, there's no guidance on it, or there's no family provision.
Currently, I don't think it necessarily comports with one of the exceptions in the general statute.
And I think the whole purpose of, what we were trying to accomplish here was to allow me, if I got a farm, to cut off a piece of property to one of my children to build a house. And that was that was the goal here, was not to keep them from having a piece of property to build a house on. If you go to the part where you can just start cutting off lots and just give me a lot, just give my, my kids a lot, then that's not being used for the purpose that we're talking about, and that's to build a home on, so they can have somewhere to live on the family land. So, I think what Rick said is, we have to be really careful here that we're not crossing over into trying to allow a subdivision to become part of a subdivision done as like a family subdivision, not so they don't have to comply with the ordinance. Because you got to consider down the road, if this property is sold, whoever it's sold to, they're gonna want access and a legal access so they can get a loan on that piece of property. And if you don't have that from the get-go, then there you go, you're limited the use of that land to your daughter or your son or whoever. So.
Yeah, well, I think the only reason we're even talking about that, I feel like that part of the ordinance is a Band-Aid to make the 2-acre idea more palatable to other members and the county as a whole. It doesn't, it's like a side set of mental gymnastics and not really addressing what we're here to talk about, being the 2 acres. And I think we get that figured out first, and then maybe if there's a stipulation or whatever to apply to unique circumstances, we make a fair attempt at it. But as much as we may want to or prefer to put in language or provisions for things, we can't foresee or address what may be or may not be from what we know today. We can't fix all the potential problems that come about. We can only make the best attempt to, I guess, try to come up with a compromise or a solution and something that makes it, transferable and preserve rights of ownership for not just us now or those individuals now, but also family members or others, whether they're family, adopted, in the county, outside the county, or wherever they may come from and why they may choose to live and work here in the county. So I guess all that to say, I mean, I understand what this piece here is trying to address, but if we weren't here talking about the 2-acre minimum lot size anyway, we wouldn't be having to juggle this portion of it around.
I guess what I'm saying is not that that's a problem, but let's proceed with caution and let's not create a situation where the exception can swallow the rule.
Would you recommend, on the legal side, that we do away with this for the
Do away with provision of only 4
yes,
to allow for unlimited subdivision?
no, just
No, maybe except.
not making any exception for family who has to comply with the regular rules that are in place. Pretty much what I think Stephen is saying, that we keep the rules and it applies all the way through.
Well, I think what I'm saying is that because probated wills and the subdivision there is allowed not to comply with the subdivision requirement, this is almost like an acceleration of that, right? So we're saying this could happen at some point. So why not let it happen now if these are the people that would stand to take the property at some point anyway? Why wait for grandpa to die before we allow this to happen? And I can understand that theory. It makes sense to me. But because we are painting a little bit outside the lines, and we're not the only ones, by the way, we did some research, Michelle did. There's plenty of other local governments in North Carolina that are allowing some form of exception here. I'm not averse to that. I just don't want to create, like I said, an exception that's so large that it swallows the rules. And we end up with 40-acre lots divided into 40 parcels with no subdivision requirements, and we end up in a place that we don't want to be. So that's all I'm trying to say. I don't know if that helps.
And just for clarity, that was the very last sentence of the family clause. It says, in those circumstances, such subdivisions shall be subject to all lot sizes, road improvement, and other regulations as required by this ordinance. Is that saying that's if and only if they wanted to do it before the 1 year?
Right, basically, if they violate the precepts of being a family subdivision, it just kicks them into that next category, into a class 2 minor subdivision. So they would no longer enjoy the lot size, immunity, and other specifications that go along with being a family subdivision. They would just kick up into being a class 2 minor subdivision.
Not to be a dead horse, but on that same thing, I guess the only issue is the 2-acre minimum piece.
Right.
If you think about it, they can subdivide as much as they want to. They wouldn't be, it doesn't have to be necessarily 2 acres. It could be a little smaller.
Sure.
I would advise sticking with this plan because it's not hard to think of a way to circumvent the 2-acre rule by using this as a mechanism to do that if there's unlimited subdivision potential. So if I know that my parents own a parcel of land that's 50 acres, we want to subdivide it into 1-acre lots. And all I need is the person who owns the property and a couple of their kids to be involved in the inheritance of it. We could easily subdivide the entire thing, and then there's no restriction on the sale after that. I just think that's too easy a loophole to envision someone using. I think that's why I think this is written the way it is and should stay the way it is.
Makes sense.
I think that's what we should stick with this. I think it allows for provision for, if I want to cut a little piece of property off my farm to give to one of my children or something, and I don't want to give them but an acre, but as I've already done this, I don't think that anybody, farmers, want to put your child on acre land. 2.5 acres of land is not a lot. Because you gotta stop and think you're going to put this house here. And, you might want to, they might want to put them a garage over here. Well, if you only got an acre of land, you ain't got much room for that. You ain't got much room to put nothing else on there except for the house and the driveway. So.
Septic repairs.
Yeah, you got your septic tank repair, your septic tank, and it takes up all that, so, I think as an individual, as a farmer, as a parent, I'm not gonna put my youngin on acre of land. If I got the land.
So can I switch gears
Yep.
off of 2 acres? Just a minute. And I apologize for not being here last month. I was on vacation. Stormwater drainage, 6.9. And this is a question from my knowledge. On page 10. Subdivider shall provide an adequate system for drainage of all post-construction stormwater. The design of such a system shall be certified by a licensed engineer and included with the construction plans related to the project. Yada, 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 which means that it will be on the final plat. Is there a mechanism in Alamance County that has to be certified after it's been built? And does that belong to the UDO or the main code in Alamance County? Is there a mechanism in Alamance County that whoever builds a stormwater retention system must enter into a maintenance agreement to maintain such system?
Excellent question. So.
Does it belong to the UDO? if,
So this is not a drastic departure from what's already there. So typically our process is, especially for major subdivisions, preliminary plans, TRC review, submittal of construction drawings, and the construction drawings include the road profile, road specific stormwater, those types of mechanisms. We look for the engineer stamp of approval, trust that the engineer has certified the adequacy of the stormwater system. It gets built out. And then that's it. We don't have any mechanism. I don't know that we have the scientific and engineering expertise from a staff perspective to then go back out and verify that it has been built according to those plans. We simply rely on the engineer's certification that it's adequate.
so most of our surrounding municipalities and so forth, and some of the municipalities within the district, they do require certified as-bills. And they do require some type of maintenance to make sure that feature is performing as designed so that you're not impacting other areas. And the UDO may not be the place to address that.
Yeah, is
But
it?
if I put in a system that is a multi-layered system and I don't clean it,
Yeah. I think if it's.
and
gonna
who
be-
cleans it? Who is it? The subdivision, the
Like I said, I think that's an excellent question. And if it belongs anywhere in local code, it probably belongs in the subdivision.
So, but most of our surrounding, maybe Caswell doesn't. We'll say that, maybe Caswell doesn't, but, most do. I know Graham to some extent does, Burlington does, Mebane does. Orange County, we don't even talk about that, Durham is worse.
Durham, you don't wanna talk about either.
Hmm?
Durham, you don't wanna talk about.
We don't wanna talk about Durham, we don't wanna go there.
Yep.
But there has to be a meeting.
Sure, yeah.
And
Part of it too, from kind of a staff perspective is anytime you're talking stormwater, you're really talking NCDEQ.
Mhm.
And so, we do require verification of like sediment erosion control permits, those types of things. And so we just have to assume, we have to rely upon engineering certification and NCDEQ follow through. For
it's
those
not a
types of
safe
things.
assumption that NCDEQ is certifying that stormwater mechanisms are installed as designed.
Sure.
And it's 100% not a guarantee that they are going to monitor how their discharge is.
Yeah, they don't,
They're not,
they don't,
they won't.
they only look at the erosion control, and unless they get a call from somebody else
Yeah,
saying,
they don't.
I got sediment in my front yard, they don't really.
Yeah.
Who owns these, in these developments, who owns these?
Usually it's the homeowners association.
Yeah.
It's the homeowners.
The
association.
HOA
It's in
or
a
the
commercial
municipality,
development, it's whoever
Yeah,
owns the
HOA,
commercial plot.
right?
And they're required to.
Municipalities, right?
If it's a public,
They're required to go out and inspect them on an annual basis. Most of them don't. And you don't hear about it until it's a problem,
Right.
unless you live in Durham.
well, I know that very intimately because I just did a pond inspection for a client in Durham, so.
Yeah.
And got them certified, so I totally understand that, and I don't even think, as a county, well, one, we don't have zoning. Two, we don't even have a stormwater design manual, or
Right.
stormwater design ordinance that I'm aware of. So, I mean, the only stormwater related item or call out, like you're saying, is here in this paragraph. But yeah, until there's a requirement for a developer to put in a detention pond, whether it be a wet pond, dry pond, biocell, whatever it may be. And then a standard to as-built it, to make sure it was built as it was designed. And then have a lawyer draft an agreement, say, okay, this device sits within this easement. These people are required to maintain that easement and maintain the device. And do a routine inspection after every storm event. Every year, get a new certification. But to do that, you have to do what you alluded to, is have staff in-house or contract it out to someone that understands it and can, read it.
Well, most of
And
the time you don't
certified.
hear about it till it's a problem.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And I'm speaking to this from personal experience.
Yep,
Where one didn't get installed as it was designed.
yeah,
And the discharge did not go downstream, it went across stream and blowing the value of the property below stream.
yeah,
Caused mold issues
yeah,
that
Yeah.
were certifiable, and then lawyers got involved and the town got. It was
It's a
And I'm
problem.
not saying that
Yeah.
the county needs to provide personnel to necessarily go out and maintain them, but don't you need to at least have something that says, hey, you gotta make sure that you comply with what you say you're gonna do. If you're not gonna preserve, we're talking about preserving farmland. I mean, I can point you right now to one that, in an area that didn't have stormwater plans. And that planning board didn't know. And it's now turned into a marsh. And you talk about not being able to use your land and sell it, yeah. So,
No, I think it's very thoughtful and wise, and if y'all want me to do some research and amend this and bring it back next month, if it's that important, we could certainly go that route.
I mean, first of all, is this place to address it?
I don't know where else it would be addressed unless we crafted an entirely different ordinance, but, the way that we operate administratively is, again, if we have a subdivision proposal that comes in that is, of the nature that requires some sort of stormwater design, we rely on the engineer's stamp in those construction plans. If we have a development that is not a subdivision and they are proposing to, develop an acre or more of land, we require NCDEQ, sediment erosion control permitting, and all the rest. So we have some mechanisms, on the front end to say, show us the best you can. And again, we just have to trust the engineer certification and the state agencies.
I mean, from the standpoint of building them, I would prefer that it be required that I certify and record it. Because then,
Yeah.
as it goes down the line and it's not been maintained, then I can say.
And there's nothing at all about.
It was right.
Nothing about, like, private roads are one thing. We get private road proposals frequently, require a maintenance agreement, on and on. It's very routine, but when it comes to stormwater or other mechanisms, at least not that I'm aware of, Ian, you might be able to correct me on this, but there's nothing at all about any type of a required proof of a maintenance agreement for a stormwater system.
And I mean, that may be something.
Yeah, and that's because it defaults to the state.
Gotcha.
Yeah, because, it defaults to the state from erosion control perspective.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there is the stormwater component, that's more of a permanent feature or a permanent issue. But the state, they're only concerned to the point of where Falls Lake, Jordan Lake, Haw River, nutrient sensitive waters and all that sort of stuff fall. And if you're within that watershed or whatever, you have to meet standards for that. Or if you're discharging water directly into a stream or, discharging into a buffer, then you have to, if it's channelized, you got to dissipate it and turn it into sheet flow before it enters the stream or the buffer area. That's one requirement. But like you said, that's one of the things where the county defaults to the state standards because there's no staffing.
Right.
And there's no staffing because of the requirement. So
Yeah.
chicken and egg, maybe,
Yeah.
what comes first, but as much, I hear your concern. I see it, I work in it, I understand it. But as much as I have a career in engineering, I'm also, a strong proponent for free land use. And the fewer requirements I have, the happier I am. That's just my standpoint. But that's personal opinion aside.
Well, the stormwater is gonna be required regardless, right? Whether it's on the local level or the state level, depending on the development.
Well, and that's the other thing. If it has to be built to DOT standards, the stormwater has to be addressed to maintain safe roadways. Absolutely. But as far as Alamance County having, or at least my understanding, having percentage requirements or thresholds for impervious percentages on a given parcel, or if you have to treat the 1 year, reduce the flow of the 10, 25 and hundreds, provide a path for flooding and that sort of thing. I'm not aware that it's there.
So we don't even have, so I can put as much impervious as I want. And I don't have to handle or treat the runoff. Is that what
No,
you're
that's
saying?
not the case, especially not in watershed areas. Yeah,
Okay.
there's specific rules on density limits in watershed areas.
Well, yeah, that's the density limit, but I guess from a stormwater treatment, stormwater quantity control standpoint. I'm not sure, is that there in ordinance somewhere or in a HIDO for heavy industrial manufacturing uses?
I know your major towns do in Alamance County,
If you're in the city limits, right?
if you're in the
Right,
city. limits.
but if you're in unincorporated areas outside, far north or far south in the county,
Yeah.
I think this is all we got.
Yeah.
Again, sorry, I wasn't here last month to bring it up.
That's a good point.
It's a great item to bring up.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the draft as presented.
Got a motion.
Before the second's made, I think we need to discuss it more.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. We gotta have a second to open up discussion.
I make a motion to open discussion.
I second. Basically, that motion died due to a lack of a second.
Mr. Vines, could I impose on you to rescind your motion?
Okay, when would you second the motion, then you can discuss it, then you can vote.
I understand that.
Yeah, okay, if we want to discuss it first, okay.
Okay,
I want to see it. Oh, that's what we were.
so we've got a motion and a second to discuss this some more. Has anybody got any question about that? All in favor of discussing it some more, aye? Opposed? Okay. Motion carries unanimously. We're gonna talk about it some more. Thank you.
Does that mean tonight or the next meeting?
I'm not.
You'll have to ask the guy that made the motion. I don't.
Didn't put a time.
Well, the motion to discuss means tonight, right?
Yeah, that means now.
Means next.
Reasonable time.
From Robert's Rules of Order. perspective.
I can talk stormwater, I can't talk Robert's Rules of Order.
Well, you're not out of order.
Okay.
So the procedure is you get a motion, you get a second, then you discuss it. And a lot of the stuff we do down here, like the German, we don't discuss that. We just get a second and go with it. Put it in.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
But now the floor is open for discussion.
I had just a clarity question, 6.9.5.
Now's the time.
Nothing to do with. This is more so just the variance process, and I know it's actually invoking onto another board procedures. But I was curious that under this provision, it talks about when unnecessary hardships will result from carrying out the strict letter of a zoning regulation. Being that we don't have zoning, what provisions would they use to rule on?
That's a really good question. It's something that I've kind of contemplated as like a legal or philosophical question as well. So this is verbatim from the general statute. General statute 160D-705, I believe, outlines the specific criteria upon which an applicant can seek a variance. I think in state parlance, when they talk about local land use regulation, the umbrella term zoning is equal to the local land use regulations. So they almost see it as whether or not the jurisdiction has zoning, the same enabling legislation that gives you the authority to have zoning also gives you the authority to regulate subdivisions, to regulate other type of developments, so on and so forth. So I think just from a legal perspective, it's almost like they're interchangeable terms.
That's what I was curious.
100%.
Should it be zoning / land use?
Right. I have in the past, changed it from where it said zoning to where it says the local ordinance or the land use regulation or whatever. If zoning doesn't apply, but I think from a legal perspective, it's just kind of an interchangeable term. Agreed.
That was just a clarity when I saw
I
that.
think I actually asked you that. Let's go. I think you did.
Somebody else, I had another one, but I gotta find it.
In our packet, we have, pie charts.
Thank you, Ian.
That we did that not a year ago.
Yeah.
Pie chart. Roughly 4 or 5 views, and then we got a pie chart from just, about 8 months ago, looks like. I guess I'm probably more interested in the pie chart than this past 8 months, since September 15th of 2023. Okay, so what we have there is, we have one, piece of pie there that, 8,000 to 10,000 square foot, 12% of the development. I'm assuming that this is what has been permitted and approved.
These are approved subdivision plats, yes.
Yes, and I'll add one note, so this is, with some slight discretion, so in cases where we would have a subdivision that someone has 10 acres and they're cutting out an acre of land, only that 1 acre is being counted, so it's looking at lots intended for development, so if someone had 10 acres and splitting that in half into 2 5-acre tracts, then those 2 5-acre tracts would be counted.
So that would be, okay, so for that particular scenario, then you're talking about the 5 to 10 acres, 10% in the gray pie there? Okay, all right, so let's go back to, the 8 to 10, it's 12%. Well, that's not involved with what we're talking about at all, right? I mean, we're talking about you can't do 8 to 10 in with a well necessity, right? That's
Outside you can.
that,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, offsite you can do you can do minimum of 20,000 square foot. Or no, or that's community well, sorry.
Yeah. Offsite, you can do a minimum of 8,000 square feet.
also, and that's really basically what you're talking about is sewer and septic.
Yeah,
correct. Or public water and public.
Yeah, public, right, public water and public, sewer. Okay, so that's gonna be in your ETJ, really. I mean, really, I mean, how many we're gonna be able to do in the county, right? We don't have that.
Yeah, I mean, none of this is ETJ. That 8 to 10 and that 10 to 20, those are, I believe it's 37 lots from landing at Summer Haven, which is off of Orange Island.
Yeah, so this
That
all
is the only case
unincorporated,
where we
but I
have
think your point is not necessarily the ETJ, but kind of the surrounding area of those cities.
Or they do have that opportunity to tie in something. Okay. All right. So then you get down here to, and I'm assuming all these, when you get into the larger lot sizes or even the current ordinance of 30 to 1 acre, that is based on, is that, developer, desire, or is that been regulated by, the health department? That's the orange pie.
Orange or yellow?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, yellow pie.
Yeah, I mean, that's under current ordinance, so it's what's permitted by the health department and what's allowed.
So they come in, basically with their plot. They're with 30,000. Some of those lots may be 1 acre. Is that based on health department, the ground didn't perk or whatever?
They will bring to us a proposal
Okay.
and we will permit or deny their proposal. We cannot tell them what size of lot they need to bring to us.
It's about 15% of the development, what that looks like there so far. Right? Then you have, the 1 to 2 acres. And I'm assuming that's blue on that, the darker blue.
Yeah.
23%. Now, those obviously, the development side, they want the 30,000, right? So that means somewhere or another, that 30,000 didn't work. Was that, so these 1 to 2 acres, is that based on health department or is that based on development design?
I can't entirely say, I mean, subdivision to subdivision, it could be either, really.
Yeah, when we receive subdivision plats, unless when somebody delivers it in, they kind of give us anecdotal evidence about how they got to that lot size. We just verify that the lot size, the setbacks, the road access, the other features of the subdivision ordinance are adhered to. We don't always necessarily know how they arrived at that specific lot size.
Then the rest of the pie is 30, 40, 45% basically, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and those are all 2, 3 acres, 3, 4, 5, 10 plus, right? And again, that development is, so we don't know if that's health department related, the ground didn't perk, or, they wanted 5-acre home sites or whatever.
Right.
So we don't know any of that information from this pie, but
Along that line, just a point of clarification. This is permitted, approved.
There's two different charts. The one that's the 5-year chart is the one I did when Tanya Cattle was the director. And so that first chart is the one where they are environmental health permits. That's the chart I generated off of our information, our records. The second one is one Ian did off of subdivision approval plats that were recorded
Since September.
since September. But in order to be an approved plat, it has to have a permit through environmental health, either an approval or a denial. So a person can subdivide a lot that's unsuitable for septic. They just have a different subdivision plat approval.
So if there were any adjustment made to size, it would be done during that approval process.
Yeah.
Or when it gets a permit, it's already been adjusted,
Yes.
if necessary.
Okay, so then I guess then let's, pull up the health department's, pie chart. So, less than 1 acre is 25% of the lots permitted. And over an acre to acre and a half, another 23%. So less than half the development is within, what maybe some in the room may want. And then the rest of it is probably what others in the room want. Is that right? Is that one really seeing?
Yeah,
So what are we talking about?
if you take, we were up here looking at this this chart, the one you're on now. If you take those three pieces, that's 74.5%. The 4 acres plus the 0.1, the 0.5 to 1 acre lots, and then the 1 to 1.5 acre lots. Those three size lots comprise 74% of the lots. If you break those numbers down, the average of that lot is 1.62 acres across the board. My proposal was 65,000 square feet a year ago. I still think that's a good number.
About that.
And that's based on 5 years of development right here in that chart in Alamance County. I mean, those are their numbers. I'm just using math to add them all together and divide them by 5. And that's 70,567.2 square feet in every lot. Based on that. Yeah, some of them are 4 acres plus, but some of them are not. But at the average of that whole thing, if you're trying to get to a minimum size or affect a minimum size, right there's your number. Based on a 5-year average.
And that was the chart based on septic evaluations that you created.
Now that's a real number.
Yeah.
That's not an imagination. That's what's been done.
Yeah, so effectively, approximately 50% of the lots, I guess, were really, to some degree or another, based on what the land could really accommodate versus what a section of language would have outlined.
Yeah, there is some realness to the soil on the lot and what it can do and what it can't do. You know, I think there's a lot of talk about the Randolph County mega site. That southwest corner of the county has terrible, terrible soil. There are pockets of good soil, but naturally in that area, those lot sizes are gonna be larger. Just because the soil isn't there to make a tight lot.
Yeah.
A lot of the lots that get created are done so before they even come to us because they'll have a consultant or have somebody help them do a design of that subdivision and know that it can't be a 30,000 square foot lot. It has to be an acre lot before it even gets to us. So that
And they already know what their yield's gonna be essentially for that project.
Right.
Yeah.
But their proposed yield.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So help remind me, are we talking about this minimum lot size? Also governing lots that would have off-site treatment or no? I can't remember.
No, it's
So
just
those would be
standalone single family.
Alright, on-site treatment,
Yeah.
They,
on-site home.
yeah, there would be an option to do a cluster subdivision of lots less than 2 acres, but they have to dedicate
But they.
35% of
portion.
the development to
Yeah,
open
yeah.
space.
Got it. Good, okay.
Or they could do something in between. Request a special use permit, come before the board, have conditions imposed on the development, and
Sure.
seek approval that way.
Sure.
So Vaughn, while you're doing all your arithmetic up there, what is the total pie, add all the numbers together, and what is your average?
I don't know. I didn't do that.
Because if you take that pie, only 28%, 48% is, between a half acre and an acre and a half. So that means that, you got, what? 52% that is over an acre and a half to 2 acres.
Yeah.
So if you average this side of the pie, you're pushing this half of the pie, you're pushing close to 3 acres. Average. If you add the whole pie together, like you said, it's 1.7, is that what you said?
1.6.
1.6. So, I mean, if you go to the average, if you go to the 2 acres, you're not pushing this thing way out of line. You're doing something that's gonna help in the future by going to 2 acres. I'm just saying it's just something that we're looking at, what can we do to do something for the future? And I think that we already have 2 acres in place for watersheds. If we had a uniform acreage across this county, that it's all 2 acres, we don't have no arguments. It's not unreasonable, I don't think, to it gives you plenty of room for your septic tanks, gives you plenty of room for your waivers, gives you plenty of room to have a garage or whatever you want to do. I mean, that's just I think this is a good, what been developed is a good plan. I really do. That's all I just say.
So with the 2 acres, so you have, if the 2 acres was the standard subdivision, and then you have, what's the third option?
It's a conventional cluster and hybrids.
Yeah,
The hybrid, So they have, so the hybrid could still be something that is proposed, that goes through just an extra approval process. Is that right?
That's right,
It doesn't come across and just only your desk.
The hybrid
Comes
would
back.
be, the hybrid would be the only option that ultimately would have to be approved by the planning board. Conventional subdivisions and cluster subdivisions could be approved administratively.
So there already is an avenue.
It is more procedurally burdensome for the developer. There's no doubt about it. But it does give flexibility to the ordinance so that everything is not required to be at least 2 acres. If they're willing to go that route. So an example would be, you got your conventional subdivisions, everything's at least 2 acres. They'd be looking at maybe a cluster option, but if the required open space percentage, for example, is 35%, they go, I don't know if we can achieve 35%. We're not gonna do 8,000 square foot lots. We're gonna do half acre lots with 10% open space. They can bring that to you as the starting point with a special use permit, negotiate conditions, and you say, okay, the 10% open space is pretty good. Can we get that up to 15? Can we do some landscaping? Can you do a buffer over here? Trails, sidewalks, whatever the case may be. And have that be through, it would have to be a quasi judicial process, which is much more intensive of a process, but ultimately have approval that route, ultimately decided by the planning board. But it's an option. It's a very detailed option, but it's an option.
There is that option there. We're not sure.
Mr. Isley, you look like you have some questions.
No, just trying to take in everything that's being discussed here. There's a lot of information to consider, and this is obviously a big decision on our part to send something to the county commissioners and what that looks like, coming out of here, be it tonight or whenever it comes out of here. I've shared in previous meetings, my concern with the 2-acre minimum lot size that we're discussing. And my main concern that I've shared about this revolves around the affordability and accessibility of housing. And I've shared this concern related to the fact, I think some speakers have spoke about it tonight, about making it more difficult to raise a family inside of our county because of the lack of affordability and accessibility of finding a home. Now, I do understand that this accessibility and affordability is not just Alamance County issue. It's something that's bigger than here. I get that. And there's lots of factors that kind of play into the reason why we have these issues. But to me, adjusting that minimum lot size to 2 acres, I believe will have an increased effect on the lack of availability, and the higher costs, which from a planning perspective is something we should be considering. Now I will admit, if I had my way, if I could sit here and say this is what I want it to be, then for me, I would be okay with a 2-acre minimum lot size. I like the fact that there's more space. I like the fact that it takes into consideration some conservation and some preservation, rural character that's very important to a lot of folks on this board. But I've been trying to approach this from a perspective of, I guess you say a 30,000 foot perspective, looking at it from a wider angle, not just where I'm seeing out right here, what my personal beliefs or considerations might be, but what's best for the county as a whole. And to make a decision that I believe is most beneficial for the most people most of the time, to paraphrase something that's been said here a couple of times as I sit in some meetings over the past couple of months. And so when I apply that, what's the most beneficial for the most people most of the time, what's the best for the county outside of what I may personally want, then I have a very difficult time determining how a 2-acre lot size achieves that goal. And so as much as I truly appreciate the thoughtfulness of the subcommittee, I know a lot of work with this. It's been something that's been going on for a long time now. And I know the consideration, I know your heart into what you're proposing. I have a difficult time. Actually, I would say, when I say difficult time, I would say it this way. I cannot support a 2-acre recommendation lot size. That's my perspective looking at from where I'm at, trying to make a decision that I think is best for the county as a whole, not just for what my personal beliefs may be. And that's Matthew, that's where my thoughts are. I was trying to collect everything and see how to best articulate that. Hopefully I did. So.
I want to make some general observations from listening to what speakers have said over and over again. Housing is not affordable. Housing is not affordable on a 1-acre lot, on a 30,000 square foot acre lot, and it won't be affordable on a 2-acre lot. Our demand from an economic standpoint has greatly outstripped the supply.
Right.
So from an economic standpoint, you either slow the demand or drastically increase the supply. Those are the general tenets of our economic model of the capitalistic society that we live in, and that's not to knock capitalism, that's just what our system is. Changing this to 2 acres is going to have minimal effect either way. Leaving it where it is going to have minimal effect either way. If you want to move the needle on affordability of a house, you've got to look at extremely dense property use. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to view it, in Alamance County, we don't have the infrastructure to do that in non-municipalities, the water, the sewer. Currently, our UDO, a large chunk, and we've heard this over and over again, there's a large chunk of our county that is already at 2 acres because of watershed and bad soil. I don't have any answers. I hear what you're saying. I think I've shared before the $2,100 a month rent on an apartment.
Yeah.
That is true, and I did sign a lease, and yeah, it's there. And that is an extremely dense 6-story apartment building 2 counties over. And they still have affordability issues. It may be a bigger issue than we're gonna solve here.
Yeah, I think there's certainly things in play that we have no control over, this for sure. But one thing that we do have control over is the regulations that we put forward.
Yeah.
And increasing the lot size to 2 acres, I believe, whatever impact that is by percentage, is having an impact on the accessibility and affordability of homes. It's going to, there's no way around it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so you're right, there's a lot we can't control, but that's one thing that we can, at least on that level.
And I guess what I'm saying is one of the mechanisms from an economic control standpoint, it's how the feds are now raising interest rates.
Absolutely.
They're raising interest rates to slow the demand, right? And to make there not be as much demand for whatever you would borrow money for.
Yeah.
It's a fallacy to say that our construction costs are so high and you're gonna make it worse by making a 2 because a 2 acre lot size will effectively supposed to slow your demand down. Will it? Who knows?
Yeah, those are unanswerable questions we're sitting at right here to some degree.
It's unfortunate. Building materials took off after COVID and they have not returned.
2x4s and 2x4.
2x4s, the trees come from Canada, the hardware you couldn't get through the Mexican border, the doors that you couldn't get through the northern border. I mean, it's just, it's.
I understand there's a lot at play here for sure.
Yeah.
But going back to what I said a moment ago, most of it we have no control over, but the regulatory side sitting here about what we propose going forward, we do have some control over. And the impacts that it'll have on our county. And we can all kind of discuss and disagree of what those impacts are. But to your demand question, you increase the lot size, you're affecting that demand, which then again will affect the price of the home. And so it just plays into the problem we're already having that's affected by some of the other things like you articulated.
Yeah. No, yeah, I echo and agree. I'm on the same page. I feel like a lot of what you've outlined. It's unfortunate that the fact of the problem we're trying to solve here tends to not make a target of the larger, high density type developers that we are trying to somewhat mitigate. But the target would also land back on, the small family or, someone in the area or outside the area trying to, get a starter home together or whatever out in the county and have that option. It's unfortunate they're part of the losing end of that, so to speak.
It's a difficult decision. It's a difficult balance to find for sure.
It is. And I think, it's been expressed in some ways that, this is kind of a stopgap measure because we don't have zoning on a county level. If it is a stopgap measure, I don't know if there's a legislative mechanism where, okay, if whatever we agree to, whether it's 2 acres, 1.5 acres, or an acre minimum lot size, is there a way to put a timeline on that portion of legislation or ordinance while consideration for zoning for the county is considered? Rather than it being viewed as a stopgap measure, once it's put into the document, it becomes permanent, like what other people have said, it becomes part of the ongoing regulation. But if we're viewing it as a stopgap until we get some sort of higher level countywide zoning in place, then are we able to put a time frame on it?
The timeframe would be until when zoning is adopted, because once zoning is adopted, then all this goes away.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying, and once that is adopted, I would like to think that's not a 10 or 15 year time frame. Let's try to bring that a little bit closer. Is that going to happen in the next 2 years or year?
Coming yesterday.
Yeah. Cause that will give us the tools to fix, or at least not fix, but mitigate some of these things that we're trying to correct
Let's
here.
not discuss the zoning word yet.
Well, I understand you're saying, and I don't wanna deliberate on that, you know, it is, not long before 9 o'clock, but I guess I've said it before in another meeting, you know, we beating around it so much, and it's a tool that helps us get at the core of what we're trying to.
So what we
Take care of
vote on, right, goes to the county commissioners.
Mhm.
And they can accept as is, they can make changes, they can
Reject.
remand it. they
Absolutely.
Send it back, they can do whatever. We're not prohibited from suggesting other changes. If they approve it, correct? It's not,
You are essentially an advisory body, so you could hypothetically, on a monthly basis, say,
Make a recommendation.
we recommend to change the X policy. We
I imagine
recommend
she wouldn't
change
wanna
the
see
Y
that
policy.
come.
so we wouldn't want to do that.
She's rolling her eyes already.
It comes in two forms. You could have just kind of a few bullet points and say, we would recommend the study of ABC policy, or something as substantial as a major modification to an ordinance. You can do it in either form. I'll make a couple of points based on the recent conversation. So if you adopt this and then someday the county adopts zoning, this doesn't automatically go away. You're still gonna have a subdivision ordinance and a zoning ordinance in a fully functional set of land use policies. You want them to be in harmony with one another. You're gonna have wise policy that reflects on each other, but that doesn't automatically mean that it goes away. I also don't know that you could have like a sunset provision in this where you say, this is only gonna be in effect for 3 years. If at the end of 3 years, we revert back to the old, but in the meantime, we're gonna try to work on something else. I don't think you could.
Can't do that.
I don't think you could do that.
I didn't imagine, so I just wasn't sure if there was something like that.
But yeah, I think it's a valid question, but I would say that as you're talking about with the recommendation, so there's no problem at all in the board saying, we think zoning is a good idea. We think the expansion of utilities is a good idea. And so maybe rather than dig into the subdivision ordinance, we dig into a discussion with the county and municipalities together. We dig into the comprehensive plan and we draft up a zoning ordinance and we go that route instead. There's nothing wrong at all with this board making that type of recommendation to the commissioners if you wanted to. And if you think that's the better way to address the long-term concerns, then I'm happy to go there with you.
I don't know if you make the recommendations on a document like this and then attach to it. We think it's time for the county to look at zoning or utilities and.
These recommendations must have come forward from the planning board with the understanding that we'd like for the commissioners to consider, zoning. But these provisions that we put in place feel like that this would be in the best interest of the county. And I say it will be in the best interest of the county. I think it will be environmentally impactful, as some of the speakers have said earlier. I think that it would help protect the rural integrity of our county. Folks that live in the city come to the country because they want extra space. Do I think it would impact the sale of my land to somebody else? No, because they're gonna pay what it takes. When they come out and offer you $30,000 an acre for your land to develop an industry or whatever, it's not gonna affect me selling my land as a farmer. When I get ready to sell my land, I can put a price on it, whatever I'm happy with, and I'll guarantee you I will get it. Because you know something? They're not making no more land. And when a piece of land comes up, whoever has got the money is going to buy it. And in most cases, it's your big, large developers that can buy this, and it just puts a burden on the small developers, on the small businesses, on the individuals because you can't compete with these dollars. So that's just I think it would be really a benefit to the county, everyone, not just one part, one of them. I think it would be a huge advantage. And it's something that we can do to looking toward the future of protecting everything that we've got in this county. That's, I understand, we talk about economic, side of it and everything, but I really don't see that it's gonna have that much effect from going from 2/3 of an acre to 2 acres. Because regardless of what it takes to buy the land, to put a house on, that's what's gonna happen.
Another question, on the, we touched base on this, the family subdivision thing. And we had a discussion early on about how many lots. Now, could the family subdivision actually be, couldn't that fall into the hybrid subdivisions where if you're gonna ask for an acre, I mean, you got 8,000 to 2 acres, couldn't that be within that special use permit?
Well, as it reads now, I don't think so, because the hybrid subdivisions are a type of major subdivision and the family would be a type of minor subdivision. And also since since family subdivisions would be exempt from the 2 acre minimum, they would not need to necessarily petition the board for some type of grace on that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I understand minor and the major, that's based on the number of lot sizes.
Yes, sir.
Even we have a big family like Stevens plans on spitting out these kids out here.
Not saying I'm planning on it,
But,
I'm just saying others.
all right, so, I mean, personally, I, this particular point, I do support the 2 acres with the caveat of the hybrid subdivision option. And developers being able to, develop a plot based on, health department approval of smaller lots. And if that works, that works. It's within the ordinance. Might have an extra hoop to jump through, but you're talking some big boy money at that point, and that the money will be there.
So on that hybrid, so remind me how that process works from the approval standpoint. I know you spoke to it earlier, but since Bill brought up, it's a good thing. Can I come back and read?
Sure, yeah. So what I'm envisioning is they would come to the county with a proposal that is neither a conventional 2 acre subdivision or a cluster subdivision. And the key feature of the cluster subdivision is probably the 35% required open space. So in a cluster, you'd be able to have lots as small as 8,000 square feet, and you'd have to retain 35% of the parent tract as open space. So let's say that they have a proposal of lots between 20,000 square feet and an acre and like 10% open space. So not the 35 and not the 2 acres. It's obviously somewhere in between. So then submit that to us for preliminary review. It would go to our TRC, Technical Review Committee, where we have multiple departments review it and talk to them about environmental health requirements, subdivision requirements, road access requirements, fire marshal requirements, all the rest. Then I'm imagining that they would probably after that need to acquire the special use permit and come before the board for approval prior to submission of the construction plans, because they would need certainty on what the actual subdivision layout is going to be before they submit the construction plans detailing the road and the stormwater and all the rest. But it would need to be based on state law, it would have to be a quasi judicial process, which means you could not get together and talk about any aspects of the subdivision proposal before it came to you in public session. You would need to be sworn in. You would need to listen to testimony, as silly as it might seem to listen to testimony in that case. And they would need to, that's another important feature of why the purpose and goals section is new to this ordinance. They would basically need to demonstrate to you in some sort of a quasi judicial way that they are seeking to have their subdivision proposal meet the purpose and goals and intent of the ordinance, even if it doesn't meet the specific letter of the ordinance. The specific letter of the ordinance says 2 acres or cluster. But the purpose and goals and intent talks about rural character and agricultural preservation and things of that nature. So you would need to make a discretionary judgment as to whether or not the purpose, goals, and intent of their subdivision proposal matches the goals that you put forward, that you preset as part of the ordinance.
Okay.
If it does, then you can approve it, and they would be bound to the conditions of your approval. So their 10% proposal for open space could go to 15. You could say on that 15% open space, we want you to have a trail. In front of all your homes, we want you to have landscaping or sidewalks. You know, you can impose conditions that are pertinent specifically to that development before final approval.
Okay.
So it's a rather intensive process, but it at least gives the developer an option to pursue that doesn't tie them to the 2 acre minimum or tie them into the cluster. The good thing about the cluster would be it could be approved administratively. So you guys would never know about cluster subdivisions. They would just get that to us. We verify lot size, we verify all the other features, we verify the open space. We can approve that administratively. The only thing that would go before you would be those hybrids that are neither conventional or clusters.
And we're, if I correct me if I'm wrong, I may have understood this correctly, we're sort of bound to making a decision when that proposal comes to us based on the purpose and goals that we have right here.
Correct, yeah, it's a big part of it.
And are those conventional well and septic tank lots in those hybrids?
I don't think they have to be. I think they could have a mixture. They can have offsite systems.
So you mentioned that some of the cluster or hybrid could be administratively approved.
The hybrid could not.
The hybrid cannot. So the hybrid
Conventional
has to come to the planning board regardless.
Correct, yeah.
And the cluster could or could not.
The conventional or the cluster approved administratively. The hybrid subdivision would be the only one, the only type that would go before the planning board.
Okay, so for the style of subdivisions that would need to come before the board, is there a requirement for that developer to notify neighbors within a certain distance of that development, of the use of land or of the project, so that they can be aware of what's coming? And if we have to review it or offer conditions or whatever, that would provide them a chance to voice what they would like to have next door or not.
Excellent question. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
Because it is a quasi judicial procedure. It would be governed by the rules of North Carolina General Statute 160D-406.
Okay.
And you have to provide notice of a hearing. This will be an evidentiary hearing. Mailed to the individuals that would have standing under 160D-1402C. And that is typically the owner of the land, let me out here, guys.
Adjoining property owners.
Adjoining property owners, anybody who might have a stake in the development. Yeah, business interest, there's specific criteria.
Okay.
It's typically a procedure that's reserved for the Board of Adjustment.
Gotcha.
But in this case, it would be granted to the planning board.
And is that just notifying adjacent property owners, or is there a distance from the property line for who's notified?
They find 1402C for you. Any parties with standing would be entitled to notice. The following persons have standing to file a petition under this section. 1, any person possessing any of the following criteria: an ownership interest in the property that is subject to the decision, an option to contract or purchase the property that's subject to the decision, an applicant before the decision-making board subject to the decision, any other person who will suffer special damages as a result of the decision being appealed, an incorporated or unincorporated association, like a homeowners association, relative to the decision, and a local government whose decision-making board has made the decision that a governing board believes improperly grants the variance or is otherwise inconsistent with the proper interpretation of the development regulation. So notice would, if I remember this correctly, so notice would be posted on the property and mailed out to those parties. If a next door neighbor came and said, they were generally opposed to the development, they couldn't simply stand up and say, I really don't like this, this isn't wise policy, you know, this developer borrowed a cup of sugar and never returned it, or, you know, never paid it back, or that. They would have to demonstrate that they would suffer special damages as a result of the approval of the decision.
Okay.
Under this criteria. So it's a procedurally intensive process.
Okay.
No doubt about it. But it would at least, again, the benefits would be, it would give you guys some discretion on these types of approvals, and it would give developers an avenue to pursue something outside of the conventional approval, the 2-acre approval.
So it sounded like that list really just involved people that either have some sort of vested interest or could suffer damages from it. It didn't really, I didn't hear anything about adjacent property owners, or did it?
Would that be
Just
something?
notification, like on the HIDO,
That's
we
kind of
did the
vague.
HIDO. We just made it a notification, and they were notified.
Mhm.
And they had then rights to come and speak at a public hearing, because I think the HIDOs, all the heavy industrial, we still have a public hearing too, and they come to the planning board. They just don't have to go through a quasi judicial unless they're asking for something that does not comply with the HIDO ordinance. There's any section in that, is that correct? That's right. So this is not really much different than our 6.5. This particular hybrid. You got to board.
Yeah, the people who may or may not suffer damages, that, I mean, yeah, that could be a neighbor, but somebody 10 miles away could try to make a case for it too, whether it's really applicable or not. But I guess I'm just saying, is there a line saying, okay, if you share a property boundary with this one that's changing use or intensity of use or something like that, will you get a heads up about it? That's other than just happening to drive by and see a sign, you know?
Matthew, I guess, correct me, but I guess what you're talking about in cases like that, if someone, say that if they're working a mile away, wanted to potentially speak on it, they would have to come before the board, present why they might specifically suffer damages, and then the board would decide if they have actual standing or not. Yeah, James.
Okay. Makes sense.
Yeah, and here we go too. So notice of hearing, notice of an evidentiary hearing conducted under this chapter shall be mailed to the person entitled to appeal application request, the owner of the property that is subject to the hearing, the owners of all parcels of land abutting the parcel of land that is subject to the hearing, and any other person entitled to receive notice as provided by the local development regulations.
Got it.
All right, county may rely on the county tax abstract, and notice must be deposited in the mail at least 10, but no more than 25 days prior to the hearing. Okay. Yeah. So, yes, really good questions. I forgot mine. You asked me on the fly. And
Sorry,
I forgot my quasi judicial procedure that I had memorized.
Sorry to make it big. Gotcha.
Who would take this quasi judicial? Would that be the board of adjustment, or would that be?
Under the way that it's constructed, it would be you guys. You would conduct an evidentiary quasi judicial hearing for the special use permit.
And if they didn't agree with ours, then it would go.
They could, yeah, they could appeal to the Superior Court.
That's what you're talking.
Well, all that said, like I mentioned earlier, Leah, I'm on the same page with you on some of the points you've shared. If we're saying what we may or may not be agreeable to, I guess not. If we were to increase the minimum lot size at all, my increase would be, or first recommendation would be 1 acre.
That's where I'm at.
I would be around the 1 acre spot too. Would be the first thoughts on it.
And I would be on the 2 acre side with the caveat of the hybrid. So. Could live with 1.5 acres, but you'd have to make some concessions as far as landscaping and setbacks, type things. Those most of you guys have been around me a long time. When we developed the Hido, it was all about landscaping setback. All right, and so I've always been a big landscaping setback guy. So if we were to go less than the 2 acres, then for me to live in my little happy world, it'd have to have some kind of a setback. Don't taste it, see it, smell it. Okay, theory, you remember that?
I do.
I'm still stuck on this in full transparency. Our initial reason for even doing this exercise was in theory to slow the density, right? And I just don't see 1 acre, 2 acres doing that. The only effective tool we have, which we don't have, to control growth and move into a planned growth mindset, we don't have current. So even making this adjustment, we're gonna be going right back to it in a couple of years, depending on who moves to the county, how many folks come to the county, how many neighborhoods come. We'll be revisiting it every 2 years. So I feel like, we've gone through a lot of man hours, days, weeks, months. And if we look at the outcome, I haven't seen anything that supports that we will achieve the outcome by making this adjustment. That's just kind of where I'm at. And I do realize that's neither for or against. I just don't think that this one adjustment will do what I would like to see done, which is plan growth, slow the density down. I just don't think that this will do it.
I already told you where I was.
Reiterate where you're at, Bob.
5,000.
I was at 65 a year ago.
And that's what's.
Mr. Chairman, I will still like to make my motion. We've done discussed this thing. And I'd like to make a motion that we accept this plan. Let's get a vote on it. If it's approved or it's not approved, then we can go from that point. We talked about this, we've discussed this over and over. I think that everyone is in consensus that this has got to help. I disagree with Mr. Anthony, but I do think that it would have a definite impact. And it's the only tool we have in the toolbox right now. And I just feel like this is something that we can do. And I'll make that motion that we accept this plan as presented and send it to the commissioners for their approval.
We still making all adjustments to all of the UDO before we send it, or we send it individual pieces?
From my understanding, this has jumped the line. This has jumped the procedure. So where we are in terms of the orderly review of the UDO sections is, tonight we still have to get to 6.1 and 6.2. But 6.9 jumped the line because there was an emphasis on lot size. This is amended in a way that it does not immediately have ripple effects in other places in the ordinance. But if it is changed, then it will have ripple effects in other places in the ordinance.
There's Jeopardy music.
Have a motion on the floor.
Or the Benny Hill thing. So I'm not sure procedurally what the time limit is, but a motion without a second isn't a motion.
Ask for a second.
I'm not supposed to have to ask for a second. If somebody else chimes in seconds, then that gives you your support.
Okay.
So did I miss anything or did we not get a second?
I'll second, his motion, so we can proceed to a vote.
Okay, so now we got a motion and a second.
I have one already. Is that to include the recommended changes that the director made? Which
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so specifically, that would be the inclusion of the language about cluster subdivisions, lot width and depth, the striking out of B under the approval process and changing subsection 15 up to 11 and the others.
Yes.
The only other thing I'll mention, if the board is inclined to approve this tonight, so the general statutes require that you adopt a consistency statement. Anytime you're going to approve any amendment to the land use regulations, which I have drafted for you because I like you so much, and I'll be happy to read that as well if you want.
Does that need to be entered during this discussion period, or does that need to come after the motion is either approved or not?
That's a really good question.
Probably,
I would,
if we can get through the vote.
I would assume that you would need to weigh consistency with previously conceived plans prior to final approval or denial. What do you think?
That makes the most sense.
If you deny it, you don't need a consistency statement. Because you've denied it. If you approve it, you need a consistency statement.
So we vote on it and then take the consistency statement?
Yes.
Okay. Does everybody understand what we're doing? Okay, is there any other discussion? Now's the time for discussion after the second, but anyhow, is there any other discussion?
You're voting on the package as it's presented.
With the additions,
With the additions and
Right.
adjustments been proposed tonight?
Right.
Okay. Let's just go around the room. Stephen?
Not in favor, no.
Okay. Vaughn?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, well, we can stop there. So we don't need a consistency statement.
Do you want to continue to, Mr. Chair, do you want to continue the vote to get a full count?
We can, Amy.
Cover that for.
Okay, Henry? Or you'd be required to since you made the motion. Bill?
I'll vote for.
Okay. So if I do my job as chair and keep my mouth shut, we got a 4-3 vote down.
Correct. Well, you can vote, but it won't matter either way because you need a majority of the board present to vote for it, and with a tie vote, it doesn't pass.
And there's no point in it being a tie.
Right.
You still want me to vote?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna vote for it. And it fails. So there we go. All right,
4 in favor and 4 against.
yeah,
So can I make a motion?
sure.
I move that we table further discussion on this till next month's meeting.
That soon?
We
Well, here's-
table discussion.
Here's what I will say about that is, we talked about kind of looking at the changes here in 2 parts, 1 through 11 or 1 through 12. You might look at it, and then the others with just being the regulatory cleanup and making sure it complies with state law and all the rest. As we continue to work through the ordinance, I still plan to bring that back before the board as we look at 6.9. So what you've seen tonight, it'll be modified. There won't be any policy changes regarding subdivision type or lot size or any of the rest. But those other kind of technical cleanup matters, I think are really good. Ultimately going to be really good changes. And I'd like to bring those back before the board when you get to 6.9 in your review process.
Okay, I agree.
So maybe table until then.
Till we get through.
But again, none of this precludes you from making recommendations on zoning, making any type of other recommendations, starting the process of looking at the comprehensive plan and the recommendations in that. You are an advisory body. You make whatever type of advice you might like.
Let me ask this real quick, since you mentioned it. Is to kick off an initiative like that, to make that formal request to the commissioner, does that start with us as a motion?
Yeah.
And then that would kind of kick the ball and get things rolling to, okay, well, how do we address it? What money we assign to it? What's the time frame we want to assign to it to establish it?
Yeah.
And all that good stuff.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I've already kind of been thinking about what that might look like. My thought was after we finished with the subdivision review, we do take a look at the comprehensive plan because the comprehensive plan or the land use plan as it's called contemplated small area zoning and in particular, adopting zoning just in the snow camp area of the county. So because the policy, county policy never actually changed to reflect that, the land use plan is automatically locked in amber as almost as soon as it was finished. So I think it would be wise to at least go in.
So it's just kind of held still in
Yeah,
that state.
at least that portion of it. The other portions are great. Probably 2/3 of the land use plan is a really good document. But at least to take a look at that portion of it. And at that point, it might be a good time to take a serious look into some of the details of what zoning might look like. And amend the comprehensive plan to contemplate that.
Gotcha.
And then send that ultimately to the commissioners as a modification.
What would be your gut feel on how long that would take?
It's a process, no doubt about it.
Are we talking, okay, so months, not 2 years or 4 years?
No, I don't think 2 years,
Okay.
2 or 4 years, yeah, at least months.
As long as we throw away the old zoning, that we never look at it ever again, just kind of start from scratch out there forward.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, and once again, not getting a second, that table motion just kind of dies. So what I would like to hear now is a motion to amend the agenda and move the new business to next month's meeting. So that we can go ahead and wrap this up, it being 10 minutes after 9.
I'll make that motion.
And I'll
Okay.
second.
All right, so we got a motion and a second to amend the agenda, and that is to move 6.1 and 6.2 amendments to next month. All in favor, aye? Opposed? No.
Motion to adjourn?
Well, no,
No?
we're going,
Okay.
the director's got some announcements. He's going.
I actually did not have any announcements
Oh.
before, so.
I've just been jumping the gun all night apparently, so.
You can't make up something to talk about.
I can't, nor would I want to at this time.
Okay.
Here,
Yes, sir.
did we have a history of like being off a month in summer? Or am I just dreaming that up?
You just dreaming that.
A dream.
Dreaming that up? Oh, okay. I just thought we were off one. Maybe that was due to December.
Well, we know he's not gonna be here next month.
Yes, ma'am.
So
You got a big family.
we
subdivision
need to go
plan.
back to this.
Oh,
Yeah,
Can I
that's right.
ask that we have some actual data instead of opinions? Can we get the number of permits in the county for new dwellings? Building residential?
Is that not what
Can
we
we
got?
get the number of new permits in the municipalities so we can look at the actual impact or we would have instead of just saying it's gonna have a huge impact or a little impact? We kind of need to know the numbers.
Is that not what we
That's
got?
that last thing.
That's not what that is.
This one is, isn't it?
It's somewhat related in that it's lots created, it's not
Yeah,
necessarily.
it's not-
building.
It's not indicative of single family home. It's just indicative of lots as a.
Oh,
I would imagine the numbers correlate pretty closely.
Maybe they do, maybe they don't.
I think the answer to your question is yes, ma'am, we can do that.
I mean, it's public record, right? I could call and request it.
I don't think you need to call us and request that.
You need to call building inspections and request.
I will be glad.
Nobody's here for inspections on.
Yeah, Alamance County does municipalities, or Elon, however.
Alamance.
They do West. And we got Burlington, Graham,
Green level.
and Nevada, the big one. We'll get the resale of houses to see what we're doing. I mean, data is important.
Mr. Chair, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
No discussion?
Not about that.
All right.
See you
How about
back.
We don't get these.